Hola mis amigos, aquí estamos otra vez en lección 6 de Panorama y en este capítulo vamos a hablar acerca de la diferencia entre los dos verbos que quieren decir to know en inglés, saber y conocer. As we look at these two different verbs, one thing to keep in mind is that just like with ser and estar that we talked about a few weeks ago, saber and conocer both mean to know in English, but they're both very different verbs. A native Spanish speaker has no difficulty knowing when to use saber and when to use conocer because they're just different. It's just that in English, we only have one word that covers both of them. So we'll talk about the different contexts so you'll know exactly when to use which verb. They cannot be used interchangeably. There's no context by which they mean the same thing and you could just use either verb. They both are completely different verbs. They're both irregular only in the yo form. So here we have an example, saber, it's conjugations. In the yo form, it's se, with an accent on the e. Now you'll note there is another word, se, without an accent, that is a completely different word. For example, in como se llama usted, that word se is a reflexive pronoun. The verb ser, or saber, you'll say, that verb for I know has to have an accent on it. So that's why we've been really trying to focus on correct spelling, correct accents. Because if you give me say without an accent, it's not that you spelled the word wrong, it's that you've chosen the wrong word. And so when you want to say I know with the verb saber, the word is se with an accent on the e. They're both pronounced exactly the same. That accent really is just to distinguish between the two words. And then conocer is also irregular in the yo form, and that is conozco. You can notice the Z in Spanish does not have a hard Z sound. It's just like a regular S, but it's conozco. So, saber, yo sé, tú sabes, ustedes, ella sabe, nosotros sabemos, vosotros sabéis, ustedes, ellos, ellas saben. Conocer, yo conozco, tú conoces, ustedes, ella conoce, nosotros conocemos, vosotros conocéis, ustedes, ellos, ellas conocen. So completely regular, except in the yo form for both saber and conocer. So here you go. My favorite way of looking at things, the conjugations of saber and the conjugations of conocer in a verb tree. Saber means, as my friend Dwight Schrute would say, fact. Things having to do with things you can actually know, like cerebrally understand in your head, something you know or know how to do is the use of the verb saber. No sé tu número de teléfono. I don't know your telephone number. My brain does not have that stored in it. Mi hermana sabe hablar francés. My sister knows how to speak Spanish. It's something that she cerebrally knows in her brain, how to speak French. Note that when you use saber with the second verb, you don't have any word in between. We don't say, mi hermana sabe cómo hablar francés. It's just sabe hablar. Two verbs, and the second verb does not get conjugated. It remains the infinitive. So keep a note of that. Different verbs have different little helper words, as you know. Saber does not. Uy, why did that happen? All right. Conocer means to know something or be to be familiar or acquainted with a person, a place, or a thing. And so probably to be familiar with is a great way of thinking about that. So it's not a fact that you know in your brain, it's something with English, with our word to know, something that you're familiar with. Conoces la ciudad de Nueva York. Have you ever been there? Are you familiar with that city? Or have you seen it in a movie? The fact that if I tell you that I'm walking down Fifth Avenue, that means something to you, right? So conoces la ciudad de Nueva York. Are you familiar with it? Doesn't necessarily imply that you've been there, but are you familiar with it? So that when I say we're walking through Central Park, that means something to you. That's the verb conocer. No conozco a tu amigo Esteban. I don't know your friend Esteban. I'm not familiar with him. That's, again, it's not a fact I have or don't have in my brain. It's to be familiar with it. I'm not acquainted with him. I've never met him. So two ways of using the verb conocer. With the direct object of conocer, when the direct object is a person, group of people, or a pet, just like we learned last lesson, we use a personal a. Again, it doesn't have any equivalent in English. There's nothing we say like that, but it denotes that the thing following the verb conocer is a person, a group of people, or a pet. So for a city, you would just say, conoces Habana. Are you familiar with Habana? For a person, you would have to add the personal a in there. Conoces a Habana, or excuse me, conoces a Celia Cruz, she's a famous dancer from Cuba. So the verb conocer, when it's used with a person, place, or thing, it has a personal a that goes between the verb and the direct object. Notice there are two other verbs, a couple of the verbs that conjugate similarly to conocer in that conozco form. So parecer and ofrecer are both conjugated like that. So it's parezco and ofrezco. Conducir and traducir also are irregular. Conduzco and traduzco, but they're also irregular in that the nosotros form, they are, because they're IR verbs, they're different that way, right? So the yo form again, conduzco, traduzco, parezco, ofrezco, are just irregular verbs that follow that similar conjugation. Okay, so let's look at this. I want you to go through these 4 examples here and choose in which blank you would use saber and when you would use conocer, and then conjugate it accordingly. So take a look at these, pause for a second, and then come back and let's talk about those. Okay, in the first one, blank ustedes, ¿dónde está el mercado? And then the answer, no lo blank. So we'll come to this, but this one is actually kind of interesting here for another reason, but let's look at that first of all. So we're talking about where the market is, right? So we're not saying, are you familiar with the market? We're saying, do you know cerebrally where the market is? And we would use the verb saber. So saben ustedes dónde está el mercado? And then the answer, no lo sabemos. We don't know, right? In this case, we've talked about direct objects before. So in this case, the lo is that direct object taking the place of where the market is, like that fact. No, we don't know it. Do you know where the market is? No, we don't know it. So that lo is taking the place of that whole phrase, ¿dónde está el mercado? Número 2, mis hermanos blank saben hablar, mis hermanos saben hablar francés, pero yo solo sé hablar español. Right? There's a difference, there's a change in subject there, but both using the verb saber because we're talking about knowledge and facts. Número 3, blank, ¿tú dónde vive Marta? Now this one's interesting. So, do you know where Marta lives? ¿Sabes tú dónde vive Marta? It's a fact. So look at the answer. No, yo sí la conozco, pero no sé dónde vive. So do you know where Marta lives? Well, I know Martha. That's the la refers to Martha. I know Marta, but I don't know fact-wise where she lives. So 2 different ways of using the verbs to know in English in the Spanish forms. Número 4, el profesor conoce Uruguay. He's familiar with Uruguay. Y también sabe bailar el tango. The first part of that sentence is true in my case. The second part is not true. Okay, so different ways of using the 2 verbs, saber and conocer. Okay, so in this one, you're actually going to listen to a recording and we'll walk you through. But again, you're deciding when to use saber and when to use conocer. So ideally, number your papers 1 through 6 and just listen. And this one just has you, if you were using it on the paper, you would circle. So that's what you're going to see happen. But just to identify when to use saber and when to use conocer.
Estructura. 6.1. Saber and conocer. 1. Saber o conocer. You will hear some sentences with a beep in place of the verb. Decide which form of saber or conocer should complete each sentence and circle it. Modelo. You hear.
Cantar.
You circle sé because the sentence is sé cantar.
1. A Manolo. 2. Montar a caballo. 3. La ciudad de Guatemala. 4. Al amigo de Don Francisco.
5. ¿Dónde está el restaurante Gelín?
6. La fecha.
Okay, so a couple telltales there. This ones I circled in green, the personal there is a good giveaway as well. That we're using the verb conocer. There is no context in which saber has the personal after it. When you see in a sentence and it needs to have a form of the verb to know, that's going to be a good indication that it's going to follow the verb conocer. All right, so just 2 different verbs in Spanish, only 1 verb in English. So that the key is to understand the difference, when to use, and then that different conjugation, especially in the yo form for both those 2 verbs. All right, any questions, let me know. Hope this made sense to you and you can understand these 2 verbs that make a big difference for you in Spanish speaking. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.